Do you want your parrot to have a long, happy, healthy life? I suspect you do, like most of us pet parents. If that's the case, then you need to have a relationship with a certified avian veterinarian. Find one in your area. And today, as a special treat, we'll be interviewing Dr. Giannopoulos. She is the head veterinarian at Feathers and Fur Animal Hospital here in San Diego County, and she specializes in avian medicine, companion parrots specifically. So in this interview, we'll be discussing topics of avian medicine with Dr. G. And then also, if you're viewing this podcast on our YouTube channel, you can see shorts of her examination and intake process for Miss Pepper Jalapeno, the spiciest parrot in the world. Hope you enjoy. You're listening to the Busy Beak Podcast, where we talk about all things a bird, from parrots to chickens and everything in between. I'm your host, Christian Diaz. Follow us on social media at The Busy Beak.
Hi, I'm Dr. Giannopoulos from Feathers and Fur Animal Hospital, and I'm a bird veterinarian here in San Diego. I'm also a general practitioner for dogs and cats, and I do some basic stuff with small exotic mammals like rabbits and guinea pigs, and rats and ferrets and chinchillas, and the list goes on. I don't do reptiles or fish, okay, but birds are actually my specialty, and I've been here in San Diego for about 2 years, but I started my own mobile clinic, Feathers and Fur Animal Hospital, about a year ago, and I am mobile for now, but I am looking for a brick and mortar practice eventually, because what I really want to do, my end goal, is to be able to hospitalize birds and to have a place where birds can be boarded with medications, boarded with training, boarded with diet conversion. I actually have all these crazy ideas in my head. And I'm from the Bay Area originally, and I am residency trained in avian medicine from the Medical Center for Birds, which is a bird-only hospital in the Bay Area. And I know it sounds really crazy to be a bird-only hospital, but even crazier, there were 5 full-time vets there, and it was a pretty crazy couple of years, because there were no fewer than 30 birds at any given time in the hospital, and that's just hospitalized side. The boarding side was always between 20 and 40 parrots. It's wild. Yes, I love you. But I've always been a bird person. I've had birds since I was a little girl. They're like my heart of hearts. Yes, I love you so much. Some people would say that I am an Amazon on the inside. Those people being me and people who know me very well. But specifically probably a yellow nape too, like Mr. Pepper Jalapeno here. Yes, he's just waking up from sedation, so don't mind him. He's just coming to his senses here. But yeah, that's me. And my goal is to take care of the birds in San Diego. I can't do it all myself, okay? But I sure can try.
So for bird owners, one of the big things for them is when to take your bird to the vet.
Oh, really good question. Thank you for asking that. I think when you first get a bird, taking them to the vet and having kind of an intake exam, if it hasn't been done beforehand, is always a good idea, especially to establish care for this bird. So that way you have an open channel of communication. Very much like you and Mr. Pepper Jalapeno here. Because even though, after we leave today, it doesn't mean that our relationship ends. I'm always here if questions or concerns pop up as well. So definitely when you first get a bird, and especially if you're new to birds, it's good to get a good foundational understanding of where your bird is at, medically speaking, but also in terms of their lifestyle. Mm-hmm. For companion parrots, the absolute most important thing for their health and wellness long term is their husbandry, meaning how you take care of them, how you feed them, their environment, their enrichment, both socially and physically, and also with foraging opportunities and things like that. It is very important to their long-term health. In fact, I would say the majority of diseases, problems, trauma, things that I see from birds in a clinic setting are mostly preventable with a proper diet and husbandry and all that stuff. So it's very, very important to get all those foundations in order first. Definitely annual exams. So when you first get a bird, annual exams. And then, of course, anytime a bird ain't doing right or acting off or in some way. Annual exams, I preach that not only for dogs and cats, but especially for birds and exotics, because parrots are prey species, unless you're a Kia. But they are, for the most part, prey species. And so by their very nature and evolutionary biology, they are designed to hide their illnesses. And so you have to be very, very, very take initiative and be almost like aggressively on top of their health and wellness to catch things before they snowball out of control and become a big problem and kind of blow up in our face later, so to speak. So when you first get them, annual exams, and then anytime a bird is just off, the kind of classic signs of illness are very often very nonspecific. And sometimes the signs that they will give you will be subtle. So maybe, over 5 or 6 months, maybe they'll lose 15 or 20% of their body weight. And unless you are like weighing them every so often, every week, every 2 weeks, once a month, anything is better than nothing. You may not be able to kind of catch something like that. Sometimes just being kind of fluffed or quieter than normal is a sign of illness. Any abnormal changes in their droppings. Poop health is health for people and for birds and for all animals, honestly. So monitoring their poops and their droppings, which includes feces, urine, and urates. Monitoring the amount, the quality, the texture, the colors, things like that. Kind of the character of it is also very important. If there's anything off with that, definitely would indicate taking your bird to a vet as well. Definitely emergency, red flag emergency. If they're on the bottom of their cage, they're not responsive. You're like, yo, Mr. Pepper Jalapeno. And he's just like, can barely even open his eyes. Or if she's just like sinking, if they're just like sunken in and fluffed on the bottom of the cage, that's an emergency. You need to get your bird to the hospital ASAP. Obviously, or maybe not so obviously. But in general, I think every bird really needs an annual exam.
Awesome. Could you talk about blood tests that we need to do with our birds?
Yeah.
Should be doing with our birds.
Yeah, really, really good question. So for younger birds, and that, like, how young is young? Depends on what species, right? Because budgies don't necessarily live 30 years. But, someone like Mr. Pepper Jalapeno, if with any luck and good health here, you're probably going to have him for another 60, 70 years. I hope so. Mm-hmm. And especially because of all the good things that you are changing in his lifestyle and diet. But in general, when they're younger, I think doing blood work every couple of years, like maybe every 2 to 3 years, both a complete blood count called a CBC, and that looks at red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, but also a chemistry panel, which looks at liver values, kidney values, electrolytes, proteins, cholesterol, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Both of those pieces of information are very, very insightful. So, and even in good health, some people might say, well, if his physical exam was normal and this bird is acting normal and this is just like an annual wellness and my parrot is only 5 years old, why should I do blood work? Good question. You certainly don't have to. You don't have to do anything. But it's very important, I think, to establish a baseline, especially for an individual. From my perspective as a veterinarian, do I have reference books to like look up a yellow nape Amazon and see what should their, bile acids be or their white blood cell count? Sure, I have those numbers to compare to, but there is always individual variation and changes within one particular individual over time is more significant than, one timepiece. If he never got blood work in his life and then all of a sudden he's 30 and he's sick and I do blood work and then I look at these numbers and I'm like, I wonder, how I interpret them is informed and influenced by baseline blood work when he's healthy, actually. Is that white blood cell count, especially if it's in the gray area, could it mean actual like infection, inflammation, or is it just a stress response? I don't really know. Let's see where he was at when he was healthy. Mm-hmm. So that's really, really important. Also doing blood work regularly every 2 to 3 years when they're younger, it really establishes like a pattern. So it's very, very, very insightful and helpful, but also so you can catch problems before they become like too big of a problem. But then when they're older, so I would say, and that really varies a lot too, because it depends. I mean, some Amazons, even by the time they're 30, they will have all these like old bird diseases. They will be physically and medically like geriatric because they've had, poor diet, no exercise, that kind of thing. And their bodies will succumb to geriatric diseases a lot sooner. So sometimes even like a yellow nape, I would consider geriatric by the time they're 30, depending on what the past 30 years have looked like for that bird. So it really just depends. But when they do get to be a little bit geriatric, or if you want to pay a little bit closer of attention to them, then doing blood work every single year is recommended. That's what I do for all my birds. But all my birds are over 30, and more than half of them are disabled. So they all get blood work every year. Actually, a lot of them get blood work more than once a year. But I think those things are very, very important. Of course, there's also certain infectious disease testing as well. Oops, sorry, scary Manzy boy. Which is important, I think, on intake, if certain boarding facilities require it, or in cases where certain infectious diseases are suspected.
Awesome. So what are some of the most common things that you see birds being brought in for in terms of emergencies?
Really good question. If they are older and have a history of poor diet, egg laying, or if they're one of the like top 3 species to get atherosclerosis and heart disease, sorry to tell you, Amazons are one of those in that category. Amazons, cockatiels, and gray parrots. The most common problem I see, which very often presents as an emergency, is heart disease and stroke events secondary to heart disease. And sometimes strokes can precipitate seizures. So sometimes they'll see a seizure and they're like, oh, is it lead poisoning or heavy metal poisoning? I mean, it depends, of course, but very often not so much. Getting into things they're not supposed to. So chewing on zippers, chewing on picture frames, chewing on, oh my Lord, it literally could be anything.
Buttons.
Yes. I once had a lovebird that was just nonstop seizing because she ate pieces of mini blinds that happened to be made like in the 60s, and they had lead in it, turned out. So yes, trauma, foreign body ingestion, but also, trauma for sure. So if people are just not being careful about their environment, like they're boiling a pot of hot water and they have a fully flighted conure or something, and the water like lands in the pot of water, whoops, okay, or like a candle, not only so many problems there, but like flying into it, getting wax and burn scald and all this stuff. Multi-species households where even just different species of birds, if they don't get along, you're not properly supervising them or separating them or like managing their environment in a way that works for them, they can get into trouble with each other. Definitely seen that a lot. Or like dog and cat attacks on birds, for example. Even I once had an Amazon present for being attacked by a raccoon. And I was like, okay, first of all, what are you doing keeping your bird outside? Guess what? The bird was not outside. The bird didn't have a cage. She lived on just like a freestanding perch in the living room, and there was like a doggy door that the owner was like supposed to lock every single night. And then forgot to one night. A raccoon came in, attacked the bird. Okay, anyway, things like this. So trauma, attacks from other species, either in the household or if they are housed outside, not properly reinforcing their aviary or whatever their environment is outside, that kind of thing. And foreign body ingestion is also extremely, extremely, extremely common. Those are the things that look like emergencies. Non-emergency, very common problems are obesity from a poor diet and things like that. But those are more easily correctable over time and have a good prognosis.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about the importance of foraging and enrichment?
Oh
and
my God.
why we need to do that for our birds?
Yeah, really good question. I'm really glad you brought that up, actually. So, I am a firm believer that birds are less likely to do dumb stuff like eat pieces of wood or zippers or rhinestones off of your, picture frames or carpet if they are provided with more appropriate opportunities to shred, tear, destroy. Because guess what? That's what they do in the wild. So even though a lot of parrot owners will complain about their birds being messy, it's a good thing that they're messy. That is how they are. That's their natural state. That's what they do in the wild. They make a hot mess, and what, they're dropping stuff and throwing food everywhere, and people complain about it. And you know what? I complain about it. I vacuum twice a day. Are you kidding me? This is nuts. But the thing is that in the wild, they are, seeding the next season of like trees and vegetation for the rainforests and things like that. But in a home captive environment, foraging is extremely important to implement in your own home, because that's what they do in the wild. They spend the majority of their time searching for food. If you teach your bird how to forage, and I say teach because it really is a skill that they can and will develop over time if you are intentional about it. So there's everything from like lazy foragers. I call them lazy foragers. Like a lazy forager would be like a dog, slow feeder bowl or something like that. It looks like a little plastic labyrinth or whatever. You put some food in there, some treats or something, and then throw some shredded paper or, whatever, little wood blocks or whatever on top of it. And then they just have to like throw it off, to like get to the food at the bottom. That's what I call like kindergarten foraging. So you have that kind of foraging, and then you have like all of your pellets. Literally every calorie you eat is in a forager, and they have to like work for it somehow and go to all these different places on their perch stand or in their cage or on top of their cage, in and outside of it, on the ceiling, on the bottom, in a corner, over here, over there. And that's like college level foraging, I call it. And that, not everybody is able to get to that, right? Just like not everybody goes to college, but if they can get to that, then they love that. There were actually a couple of, actually, you should totally look into this. If you remind me later, like email me later, I can totally get these papers to you. But there are some avian behavioral research papers that were published some years ago showing that if provided the opportunity for a parrot in a captive environment, if they had food like ad lib or free choice, like just sitting in a bowl, kind of like being fed off a silver platter, or if they had to forage for their food, what would be their preference? And the majority of parrots chose foraging because they actually like to forage. So it's an inherently reinforcing behavior. It keeps them out of trouble, I say, because if you can keep their beaks busy with appropriate things, then you can avoid their beaks getting busy either on themselves or on things they're not supposed to. So foraging is hugely important for so many things. It prevents eating out of boredom. It can help with behavioral issues. I once had a parrot who, of course, it was an Amazon. Of course, it was proliferant in Amazon, who screamed so much every single day because she was super jealous. Whenever I left the room, or super jealous if I like paid attention to another bird, which I did every single day. And this is a very common problem. And she was so loud and obnoxious that my neighbors called animal control on me every day for 4 months. And then I taught her how to forage for literally every crumb and calorie of food, including fresh stuff. And I wouldn't say the problem 100% resolved, but it like 80 to 90% resolved. And it was much, much, much better. And I would I would make a bunch of foragers on a Sunday because I didn't have a lot of time, working a lot, this is actually when I was a bird resident. And I would make a bunch of actually Dixie cup foragers. So she had like 3 Harrison's pellets, double wrapped in newspaper, stuffed in 2 or 3 layer thick of the waxless paper Dixie cups, taped with a tiny piece of paint, the blue painter's tape, and then like stuck in between the cage bars, like in different areas in her cage, and that kept her quiet when I left the room and when I paid attention to other birds. That was very, very, very helpful. So it's good for behavioral issues. It's good for their like actual physical health and wellness as well as their like mental stimulation as well. They spend anywhere from 60 to 70% of their time in the wild foraging. And what do they do in a cage? If we can mimic that for them in their home captive environment, then the more naturally healthy they will be. Because even though we keep these birds in cages or sometimes freestanding on perches, which you're not supposed to know, but even though we keep them in our homes, they're not truly domesticated. They are still very much wild by nature. They're, it's not like people have been owning birds for thousands of years like we have dogs.
Awesome. So if somebody wanted to book an appointment with you to have their birds seen, how could they reach you? And if they don't live in the San Diego area, how can they find an avian veterinarian?
Oh, those are really good questions. Yeah. So if someone in San Diego would like a consult for a bird, you can reach out to us on Instagram at Feathers and Fur Animal Hospital, or via email, info@feathersandfur, A as an animal, H as in hospital.com, or a phone number, which I don't have memorized, but I probably should, 619-663-5760. Thank you so much, Nurse Kathy. I am nothing without my nurses, by the way. Okay, vets tend to get a lot of the credit and attention, but listen, nurses are the real deal. Seriously. So you can get in contact with us that way, or find me on Instagram as well. Me personally at Dr. G, DRG, Bird Vet. Although I am not as active on social media as I'd like to be because I'm just too busy these days. But if someone outside of San Diego area, because I do often get this question from other people in other parts of the country and the world, how do I find a bird vet? The best way, I think, to find a bird veterinarian is to go to AAV.org, which is the website for the Association of Avian Veterinarians. And they have a Find a Vet tab. So you just click on that, you type in your zip code or your state or country, whatever, and you can search within 5, 10, 50 miles other veterinarians who are registered with this association as well. They include veterinarians all over the map, not only literally geographically, but members of this organization. So there are people who are bird veterinarians who are residency trained like me, who are not yet board certified on that website. There are also board certified avian vets on that website. Although, fun fact, not all board certified avian vets are even on that website. So that's very ironic. But anyway, that's another story. But people who at least care enough to be a part of this organization hopefully means that they also care enough to stay up to date with the information and the continuing education opportunities that the Association of Avian Veterinarians puts on every year.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, probably too much information.
No, that was great. Well, friends, that concludes our interview with Dr. G, Bird Vet Extraordinaire. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, you got to see some clips of Pepper Jalapeno's intake exam, blood work, and microchipping that was done by Dr. G. And since that video was filmed, we learned that through DNA testing that Pepper is actually female instead of male. So now she is Miss Pepper Jalapeno, the spiciest parrot in the world. But I told Pepper that she can be whatever she identifies as, and I will still love her anyway. Tune in next week for a special guest that I think you guys are really going to enjoy. So until next time, bye.